Today, we are going to travel outside our vaccine ecosystem and talk about ways we can communicate effectively with others, whether it's friends or families or decision makers like lawmakers. In the end, while each of our presenters are not focusing on vaccines necessarily, you'll see that many of their tools and advice can be applied to what we can do on a daily basis. So today's session is entitled, What Do I Say and How Do I Say It? Communicating with friends and decision makers. And as I said earlier, we have just an incredible lineup of experts with a diverse background. Jamie Ford is the Deputy National Organizing Director for Moms Demand Action and has been very active not only in her community in San Antonio, but also at the state capitol. So just to give you a little bit of background about Jamie, as I shared with you, Jamie holds a leadership position for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, which is the grassroots arm of Everytown for Gun Safety, the nation's largest gun safety organization. After a career working for a myriad of government entities in public outreach, briefly in public health. So yay, she's in the public health family, as well as management for the U.S. State Department. Jamie took a brief hiatus as a stay-at-home mom of 3 daughters, and she started in grassroots issue advocacy, first as a volunteer, starting the local group of Moms Demand Action in her adopted town of San Antonio, following the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012. So we're just thrilled to have Jamie this morning to share her experiences and her tips. So Jamie, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Rika. It's so great to be here. Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Social Media to Change the World. As Rika mentioned, I am Jamie Fetner Ford. I am the Deputy National Organizing Director for the Southern Region for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. As she said, we are a gun safety organization that came into being following the Sandy Hook school shooting in December of 2012. Our organization started as a band of frustrated mothers and others across the country, connected only by Facebook, and a mutual frustration over our lawmakers' refusal to act on gun safety. Since that time, we merged with Mayors Against Illegal Guns to form Everytown for Gun Safety, and have grown to be the largest grassroots gun safety organization in the country, with chapters in all 50 states and DC, over 500 Students Demand Action chapters, and over 6 million supporters nationwide. Our grassroots activists use social media to grow our movement early on. That is, after all, how we found each other. And we continue to do so to this day. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to walk you through some of the most successful social media tactics that we employ on Twitter. And I'm hopeful that these will be helpful to you in your advocacy and the work that all of you do. Next slide. Okay, so when our organization first started, as I mentioned, we were just a scrappy band, very small groups of members, sometimes as small as 2 or 3 people in a given place. I'm thinking of Tulsa, Oklahoma, when we first started. And we really just wanted to get time with lawmakers. We wanted to get their attention to find out what the situation was, why we didn't have better gun laws. And one of the tactics that we employed at the time was what came to be known as the stroller jam. So there were stay-at-home moms across the country who took their little ones, their infants or toddlers, to speak with congressional representatives and sort of accidentally caused traffic jams in the hallways. And this actually proved to be useful in that at the time, the gun lobby and the NRA were so entrenched in our governmental process and our public policy making process that a lot of lawmakers didn't want to speak with us at all. So the stroller jam was very helpful in that sometimes it actually pinned lawmakers into spaces where they were forced to listen to the stories of why we needed better gun laws. But what we discovered quickly was that stroller jams weren't really an ongoing tactic that we could use to hold lawmakers accountable for their votes. And so we needed to shift to a different space. And that's where social media came in. Next slide. So we pivoted to utilizing social media to bring attention to the issue of gun safety. And today, what we're going to talk about are just some of the tactics that we use specifically. The first, we learned quickly that Twitter is where the influencers are, and this is not just the decision makers, not just the lawmakers, but this also applies to businesses, to influencers, to journalists, et cetera. So we'll talk through the importance of some of that. One of the other things that we learned was that we could share individual stories and tie them together with consistent messaging and really grasp the attention of a lot of people in that way. And the third thing that we learned was that elevating partners was a really useful tool. And we'll talk through what that looks like. Next slide. Okay, so Twitter, it's where the influencers are. To start, it's where the friendly lawmakers are. As many of you know, lawmakers love to hear how amazing they are. And it's important that they hear publicly from members of your movement about how incredibly pivotal they are on your issue. If you share the love with them when they are helpful or even when they just show up, it's much easier to lean on them when you're in need. And so definitely utilizing Twitter to thank lawmakers. You can see in the examples that are shared here, lawmakers really appreciate it when you thank them publicly and often reward you for it. So that was the first. The first example is where your friendly lawmakers are. Next slide. Twitter is also, however, where the less friendly lawmakers are. And this is also equally important, if not more important, because you can see from these slides, a lot of lawmakers will say one thing publicly and vote another way. You might have experienced this in your work, I'm sure. And what Twitter allows you to do is hold lawmakers accountable for that. So you can see in the two examples here, people that are quoting lawmakers' votes, even when their public language indicates that they support something different. Or in the second example on the right, you've got folks that went in and spoke with a senator in person who told them one thing in a meeting, whereas he's saying other things differently in the public sphere. And so Twitter is a good place to hold lawmakers accountable. We've had lawmakers reach out to us who respond via Twitter or who reach out to us privately and ask for meetings after they've been held accountable in a public way like this. So we know that it's impactful and that it makes a difference and that they are paying attention to it. And we also know many lawmakers actually personally manage their social media accounts and so take a lot of pride in their presentation and the way they are perceived. And so definitely this is a great space for accountability. Next slide. Twitter is also where the journalists are. You'll see on the left side of your screen, this is just a screen grab of one of our supporters' Twitter handles. This individual doesn't even use her real name on Twitter. She goes by Jane the Hand Washer, but she has almost 3,000 followers. And while that's not many followers compared to celebrities that are Twitter verified, she has a lot of important followers. On the right side of your screen, you'll see just who some of those followers are. And they range from state lawmakers to the Mexican American Legislative Caucus to the Texas Tribune, reporters from the Houston Chronicle, the Dallas Morning News, the Texas Tribune, the local news station, Soledad O'Brien. So if you can really work at getting your supporters to utilize Twitter and to say things in an impactful way, in a strategic way, then many people will follow them. And we have had lots of media outreach, either to individual supporters or to our organization who said, we would like to speak to Jane the Hand Washer about her opinion on something, because we have so many just very savvy grassroots supporters that are out there utilizing Twitter. Next slide. Finally, we also discovered it's where the businesses are. Now, you don't think of businesses as being important when you are talking about public policy advocacy, but one of the lessons that our organization learned is that in 2015, when the Texas legislature passed open carry, our volunteers went out and tried to stop this bill, but we knew we never had an opportunity to do so because we knew the legislature would vote for it as long as it was put up for a vote. So what our folks did instead is, once the bill had been passed, on January 1st, 2016, when open carry became law, they went out to businesses across the state and asked those businesses to decide whether or not they would allow open carry by posting some egregious big ugly signs that the state legislature required they do in order to prohibit open carry. But by holding these businesses accountable in a public sphere, the businesses were forced to decide if they wanted to side with our family-oriented supporters or with gun extremists who wanted to have the ability to open carry handguns wherever they wanted. And in the end, businesses really, on the whole, sided with our supporters who held them accountable publicly through Twitter, through Facebook, through various social media spaces. And you'll see on the next slide that our supporters were so successful in doing so that movies, movie theaters, malls, restaurants, grocery store chains across the state prohibited open carry so widely that you actually rarely see people openly carrying handguns in Texas. So there was no chance of us stopping that policy, but social media allowed our supporters to impact that policy once it was passed. So if you'll move to the next slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about individual stories with consistent messaging. So one of the lessons we learned early on is that lawmakers were so entrenched from years of NRA and gun lobby influence that even the lawmakers who agreed with us in secret didn't believe that they could say so publicly, that they would be punished at the ballot box if they voted with us. So we knew that we needed to do more work on the American cultural front, and an opportunity presented itself when gun extremists started carrying rifles into Starbucks stores. At the time, we found out that Starbucks actually prohibited smoking within 15 feet of their stores. So we thought it was a pretty extreme contrast that they were allowing people to come into their stores with rifles. So at the time, we asked our supporters to tell what were essentially micro stories, just tiny little snippets about why they didn't want to go and buy a Starbucks coffee if there was going to be a person with a rifle in the store, and to share pictures of that experience. Next slide. So when our supporters around the country told their own micro stories via Twitter about why they were going to hashtag skip Starbucks, including photos of other competitors that they would frequent instead, the key in telling all these stories was for there to be consistent messaging. Number one, to make the ask clear that we wanted them to prohibit open carry in their stores. And then number two, using a common hashtag, which in this case was skip Starbucks, so that you could find all of these stories in one place on Twitter. It was really easy for Twitter to see not just the number of people that supported a prohibition of open carry, but the variety of people, the geographic diversity of the individuals, for instance, that were asking them to do this. And Starbucks was our first corporate victory, and they did, I believe it was in 2013, they prohibited open carry from their stores. Next slide. I think we skipped a slide about, was there one in between? No? Okay. So the campaign with Starbucks was so successful that we used it again when gun rights extremists open carried rifles in Target. Again, we employed the same tactic. Individuals across the country told their micro stories using the hashtag #OffTarget. And in 2014, Target prohibited open carry. These campaigns grew into a regular tactic for our organization, in which we were successfully able to change policy at national corporate entities such as Facebook, Instagram, Sonic, Panera Bread, Chipotle, Safeway, Jack in the Box, Chili's, and eventually grocery store chains across the country. And although we really hadn't managed to move the needle at the federal policy level, we were able to help lawmakers understand that our supporters had clout in the corporate and cultural spheres, and that clout was demonstrated on social media, and it would then transition to working on policy as well. Next slide. So you can see this tactic was also applied to moving legislation. This example is from our California chapter, who used the same tactic earlier this year when they held a post-COVID virtual advocacy day. Their efforts helped successfully pass crucial funding for a violence intervention program at the California legislature. Our organization was not the leader of these efforts, but the coalition working to pass this funding knew of our social media prowess and asked our volunteers to employ their social media assets in the effort. So those same micro stories with the consistent messaging across the stories has been helpful at the legislative policy level as well. Okay, next slide. The final tactic that we have employed via Twitter is the elevation of partner organizations and individuals. So I'd like to start by asking if anyone recognizes the scene depicted in this image. If you want to just drop in the chat. Does anybody recognize this scene? Is this familiar to anyone? Okay, I'm not seeing any responses. So it doesn't look familiar. Okay, so this scene is someone watching a legislative hearing. For anyone who has sat through very long legislative hearings, it can be incredibly slow and long and sometimes painful. But it's also a part of the public policy process, right? And so you go and you listen to the way that lawmakers talk through the bills that you're interested in. And so this is a picture specifically of some of our Arkansas volunteers in 2019. They were incredibly frustrated watching a stand your ground hearing. A stand your ground is a law that is known to be racist in its application, and it's one that the Republican-dominated state legislature had every intention of passing in 2019. So there was little hope of stopping the law from passing because the votes were just not there to stop it. But our volunteers, along with coalition partners, showed up anyway to testify, to show opposition, even if the law was destined to pass. Next slide. What happened in the Senate Judiciary Committee, however, changed the course of Stand Your Ground that year. State Senator Stephanie Flowers was the only female and the only person of color on the committee. She gave an impassioned speech about the racial implications of Stand Your Ground that our volunteers captured on video. And we're going to take a minute to just watch 3 minutes of her video. And Katie, you can stop it at 3 minutes if you don't mind, but if you want to go ahead and hit play, I'd like folks to hear it.
Senator, you need to stop.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't. What the hell are you gonna do? Shoot me? It doesn't take much to look on the local news every night and see how many black kids, black boys, black men are being killed with these stand your ground defenses that these people raised, and they get off. So I take issue with that. I'm the only person here of color, okay? I am a mother too, and I have a son. And I care as much for my son as y'all care for y'all's. But my son doesn't walk the same path as yours does. So this debate deserves more time. I'm in Pine Bluff. We have killings regularly down there. Mr. Hunter knows, he's our prosecutor. Now, I don't know where the heck, I know where you are from, Gary. And I don't know really where Mr. Ballinger is from. But I can tell you that for a long time since I've been back here in Arkansas, I have feared for my son's life. Now, he's 27 and he's out of Arkansas. And I thank God he is. When you're bringing up crap like this, it offends me. And then to limit the debate too, this is crazy. You don't have to worry about your children, Will. I worry about my son. And I worry about other little black boys and girls. And people coming into my neighborhood, into my city, saying they got open carry rights, walking down in front of my doggone office in front of the courthouse.
That's good, Katie.
That's a bully.
Thank you.
Do I have...
Okay, I think you get the point. It was a pretty incredible speech. And if you've ever sat through a legislative hearing,
It's
you
kind
know
of interesting. You know all this
that
stuff. This lady here is one of the presenters before me.
Okay, thanks. You know, it doesn't always get that exciting in legislative hearings. But the folks that were in the room recognized that this was a really incredible moment, and they shared this this video out and ended up being retweeted 20,000 times within a week. It became a Now This video, and so it actually ended up shaming one of the lawmakers in the room to vote with to kill the Stand Your Ground bill, and so Stand Your Ground did not pass in 2019 because of the elevation of the impassioned speech given by Senator Flowers. Next slide. And elevating partners can also mean retweeting and otherwise supporting on social media other organizations that have a similar aim to your own. Doing so just broadens the scope of your message. It helps lawmakers understand the multiple constituencies for policies and provides often critically important aid to partners that are doing the granular work in communities that your organization may or may not be doing. And so this year we did something where we elevated other partner organizations around our National Gun Violence Awareness Day and raised $150,000 for those organizations just to help elevate their work, to support their work, to keep it growing, to help generally support a movement, even though it essentially was just to help get the word out about all the different constituencies there are for particular policy. Last slide. Okay, so we were asked to give you all some takeaways that you could think about as you head out of today. So I would like to encourage all of you that as you're looking at your goal, strategy, and tactics for the 2021 Texas legislative session, that you just don't leave social media out of your plan. If you work in public health or the private sector and you've already got a well-developed social media staff and strategy, that's great. But I would suggest not to forget coordinating your message with grassroots supporters or with partner organizations. And coordinating that messaging is really key. And then whether you're working with paid social media staff or just you're a volunteer, create a plan or a structure for getting your message outside of your standard social media echo chamber and to a broader audience. And that can either be through partnerships, through coordinated messaging, through administrative means, or just through sharing compelling stories. So that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie, for all of those strategies and tips.